He thought she was just a poor girl with no lunch. But when he looked inside her lunchbox, what he found shattered his heart and changed his life forever. 17-year-old Trayston Hale was everything the world expected from the heir to a billion-dollar empire, polished, confident, and perpetually dressed in tailored blazers and limited edition sneakers. The name Hale was whispered with respect and envy across the nation, attached to luxury academies, biotech labs, and global philanthropy. And yet, beneath all the privilege and prestige, Trayston felt like a ghost wandering through a world built for others. He attended Rivercroft Academy, an elite private high school nestled in the hills outside Boston. It was a place where students arrived in chauffeured Bentleys, where kids as young as 14 carried business cards, and where GPA wasn't just a number, it was a branding strategy. Trayston could walk the marble halls with his eyes closed. Every chandelier, every trophy case gleamed like a mirror, reminding him of what he was supposed to become. A perfect replica of his father, Gage Hale, the man behind Hale Industries and the coldest man Trayston had ever known. The halls of Rivercroft reeked of money and entitlement. Boys boasted about their stock portfolios between calculus and fencing class. Girls compared designer handbags and upcoming modeling gigs. Trayston played the part when he had to, gave speeches, showed up at charity balls, smiled for the cameras, but none of it ever touched his soul. On a rainy Wednesday morning, as he wandered toward the cafeteria, with his earbuds in and his backpack slung carelessly over one shoulder, something unfamiliar caught his eye. A girl, alone, sat at the very edge of the lunchroom, far from the clusters of laughing teens. She wasn't scrolling her phone or checking her appearance in a compact mirror like the others. She simply sat there, stiff, almost still, with a dull gray lunchbox resting unopened in front of her. It wasn't just her isolation that caught Trayston's attention, it was her expression. Her face wasn't just sad, it was hollow, tired. The kind of tired Trayston had only ever seen in war documentaries or in the eyes of staff who'd been working double shifts. It didn't belong to someone their age. He slowed his steps, pretending to check a message on his phone as he studied her. She had long, dark brown hair tied back in a loose braid. Her uniform, though identical in cut to his own, looked subtly worn. An ironed patch hidden beneath her blazer sleeve, scuffed shoes, a strap on her backpack mended with thread. Everything about her was quiet. Forgotten? He couldn't place her, which was strange. Rivercroft didn't have unknowns. Everyone knew everyone, because everyone's parents belonged to the same clubs, boards, or bank accounts, but not her. Trayston's curiosity was piqued. He grabbed a bottle of water from the vending machine and meandered toward the table next to hers. He didn't want to startle her, so he sat diagonally, keeping a casual distance. She didn't look up. Her hands remained gently pressed against the sides of the lunchbox, like it was something sacred. He thought she might open it, begin eating, but she didn't. She just stared at it, motionless. Minutes passed. She finally clicked the metal latches and lifted the lid. Trayston turned his head just slightly, discreetly, and what he saw caught him completely off guard. There was no food inside, no sandwich, no snack, not even a juice box. Instead, the interior held only two things: a small, neatly folded cloth napkin with something embroidered on it in light blue thread, and a faded photograph. She picked up the photo and looked at it for a few seconds, then placed it back gently and closed the lid again, as if the act of looking had fulfilled some internal ritual. He stared at her, perplexed and strangely moved. Who was she? Why did she carry a lunchbox that wasn't meant to feed her? And why, of all places, was she here, in a school built for children who didn't know the price of milk? For the first time in a long time, Trayston Hale forgot himself, and the heir to Hale Industries found himself haunted by a girl with an empty lunchbox. Her name was Camry Levin. Trayston didn't find that out until the next day, after spending nearly an hour trying to subtly scan the school's digital directory on his tablet during a free period. She wasn't listed under any of the usual student families. No parent board association, no alumni ties, no scholarship donors. But eventually, under a hidden tab for Academic Integration Program, he found her, Camry Elise Levin, age 16. Transferred last semester, ranked number 2 in her class. She had been invisible by design. Rivercroft wasn't known for welcoming outsiders, especially not ones from low-income families. The Academic Integration Program was the school's attempt at social redemption, a PR move to prove that even exceptional poor kids could make it in their ivory tower. But students accepted through that program were rarely ever included, only tolerated. And Camry seemed to have taken that invisibility and made it into a protective shell. Trayston couldn't stop thinking about the photo in her lunchbox. It hadn't just been a snapshot. It was old, creased, worn at the edges. A woman, young, maybe late 20s, smiling with two children in her arms. One of them was unmistakably Camry, younger by maybe 5 or 6 years. The second child was a boy, perhaps 4 at the time. Behind them stood a rusted trailer, sunlight glinting off its metal frame. It wasn't a portrait, it was a memory captured in survival. That image haunted him. The more he observed her in the days that followed, the more details emerged. She arrived at school an hour early every morning, always alone. No luxury car, no driver. Sometimes she came in damp from the rain, her shoes squelching softly as she walked to the library. After school, she stayed behind for hours, pretending to study but often helping the custodial staff, sweeping floors, organizing books, wiping down chalkboards. When Trayston asked one of the janitors, Mr. Flanagan, about her, the man simply shook his head and said, "That girl's got more grit than half the boys I served with in Iraq." Camry never joined the other students during lunch. She always sat in the same spot, always with that lunchbox. She never bought anything from the cafeteria and never asked anyone for anything. If someone offered her something, an extra cookie, a drink, she declined with a polite smile and a quiet, "I'm fine, thank you." But she wasn't fine. Trayston could tell. One afternoon after a grueling economics exam, he followed her at a distance as she left the main building. She didn't notice him. She walked to the back of the school grounds, through the staff parking lot, and waited beside a rusted city bus stop. The old Route 83 line. Not a place any Rivercroft student had reason to be. As the bus rolled in with a screech and exhaled its old mechanical breath, she boarded and disappeared into the city. Later that night, Trayston used his father's access to pull a few records, not illegal, but not exactly ethical either. He discovered that Camry lived in a neighborhood near the industrial outskirts of the city. Not in a building, but a trailer park, registered under the name of her legal guardian, Reuben Levon, disabled veteran, 62. Her mother, June Levon, had died a year and 4 months prior from acute lymphoblastic leukemia. No insurance, no estate. Left behind 2 children, one of whom, Dawson Levon, had a rare degenerative illness that required regular treatment. Trayston stared at the screen in stunned silence. The girl who sat alone at school every day carried more weight on her shoulders than most CEOs. And suddenly, the photo and the napkin in her lunchbox weren't just sentimental. They were sacred. Trayston closed the file. His stomach was in knots. It wasn't just guilt. It was a growing sense of helpless admiration and confusion. He had spent his life surrounded by people who had everything and appreciated nothing. Camry had nothing, and still found a way to carry herself with dignity and calm. The next morning, he entered the cafeteria and saw her again, alone at her usual table. No one even glanced her way. He hesitated for a second, then picked up his tray and slowly walked toward her. As he got closer, he noticed her staring down at the closed lunchbox. Her lips moved ever so slightly, as if she were whispering something to herself. A prayer? A memory? He sat down one table away, not directly across, but close enough. She looked up. Their eyes met. It was the first time she had truly seen him. Not the billionaire's son. Not the school's golden boy. Just a boy. Curious and quiet. Camry blinked once, unsure of what to make of his presence. He gave her a simple nod and looked down at his tray, pretending to eat. She didn't smile. But she didn't leave either. And that was enough, for now. The cafeteria buzzed with laughter, digital chimes from smartwatches, and the rhythmic clatter of utensils against porcelain. It was a world wrapped in privilege. Plates overflowing with imported fruits, chef-prepared sushi rolls, and smoothies labeled by their antioxidant count. But at the far edge of it all, Camry Levon sat quietly with her faded pink lunchbox in front of her, untouched. Trayston Hale sat 2 tables away, his back half turned toward his usual group of friends who had given up calling him over. He had stopped responding to their shallow jokes and gossip about yacht parties weeks ago. Now, every spare moment was subtly angled in Camry's direction. Not in a way that drew attention, no. That would ruin it. He watched in silence, trying to understand her world from a distance. Then it happened. Camry's slender fingers reached for the clasp of the lunchbox. Her movements were slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. She unlatched it with both hands, as if the box contained something breakable, fragile. Not food, but something that required reverence. Trayston leaned slightly, pretending to adjust his bag, just enough to glimpse inside. What he saw stunned him. There was no sandwich, no fruit, no granola bar, not even a napkin. Instead, lying carefully inside the faded pink shell was a folded piece of white cloth. Next to it, a small, worn photograph. That was all. Camry lifted the cloth first. It wasn't just fabric, it was a handkerchief, once bright white, now dulled by time. Its edges were neatly hemmed, and in one corner someone had embroidered words in pale blue thread. The stitching was slightly uneven, clearly done by hand. Trayston narrowed his eyes, trying to make out the words from his seat. Camry's thumb ran over them with delicate familiarity, as if the phrase lived permanently under her skin. Then, she held up the photograph. It was the same one Trayston had seen once before. A young woman, her mother no doubt, smiling in the golden evening light, with Camry and a small boy in her arms. The background was a peeling trailer, dented and shadowed, but the people in the frame beamed like they stood in front of a palace. The photo was faded, crumpled at the edges, and clearly carried everywhere. Camry stared at it for a few long seconds, then placed it gently back in the lunchbox. Trayston couldn't look away. The lump in his throat thickened. He'd grown up surrounded by wealth. Wealth so dense it became invisible. He had seen kids complain about caviar that wasn't fresh enough, or drivers being 10 minutes late. He had watched classmates throw tantrums over being given the wrong colored designer hoodie. But this girl, she sat here every day and looked inside an empty lunchbox, not to eat but to remember. Not to fill her stomach, but to preserve something deeper. Hope, love, identity. That lunchbox was her anchor. Camry gently closed the lid again, latching it quietly. She didn't notice Trayston's eyes on her. She never did. To her, he was just another student she had no reason to trust. After all, the rich didn't often cross into her world unless they were there to gawk. But Trayston wasn't gawking. He was unraveling. All the noise around him faded. The clicks, the laughs, the entitled voices, they all became distant, muffled echoes. In that moment, he saw not just a girl with an empty box, but a girl carrying a story so heavy that she had to wrap it in cloth just to keep it from breaking. He realized something else, too. She didn't expect anything. Not kindness, not attention, not help. The way she looked down at that box was not with bitterness, but with quiet resolve. As if to say, I've lost a lot, but I still have this, and this is enough for me to keep going. That kind of strength, humble, invisible strength, shook something in Trayston Hale that he didn't know could move. When the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch, Camry stood and gathered her books. She slid the lunchbox into her bag like a sacred artifact, then slipped out of the cafeteria like a shadow. Silent, unnoticed, small. But to Trayston, she had never looked larger. He remained seated for several moments after the room had cleared. The emptiness of his own lunch tray, half a plate of untouched seared tuna, imported olives, and a still glass of cucumber water, mocked him now. His stomach twisted, but not from hunger. It was the first time in his life he had ever felt truly full of something real, and truly empty at the same time. And he knew, with absolute clarity, that he had to do something. Trayston didn't sleep much that night. After witnessing what was inside Camry's lunchbox, something inside him refused to quiet down. He lay in his penthouse bedroom, surrounded by sleek furniture and humming technology, staring at the ceiling through the soft glow of automated starlights. The silence in his home was the kind that echoed, not the comforting kind. His father, Gage Hale, had been out of town for the week, some summit in Zurich. Not that it made much of a difference. Even when he was home, the man might as well have been a ghost. Trayston had grown up shaking the hands of strangers who knew him only as Gage Hale's son, and he'd grown tired of it. But this, Camry, was different. She wasn't impressed by his name or his presence. She didn't ask for attention, and yet she held more dignity in her silence than any of the loud heirs around him. And now that he'd seen behind her invisible armor, he couldn't look away. The next morning before school, he took a risk. He logged into one of his father's secured directories, files for background checks, acquisitions, and philanthropic filtering. Trayston had used it before, mostly out of boredom or curiosity about what his father knew about people. Now he searched for a name with urgency, Levon. The first result hit hard. June Levon, Camry's mother, deceased. Date of death, October 17th. Cause, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. No insurance, no estate. $78,000 in medical debt, passed to surviving family. Reuben Levon, Camry's father, Vietnam veteran. Classified as 90% disabled after a spinal injury in 2006. Living on veteran benefits and state assistance. Physical address, Lot 9, Westbridge Trailer Park. Occupants, Camry Elise Levin, age 16, Dawson Jude Levin, age 9. Trayston scrolled down and found a note tagged by a social worker. Living conditions below state standard. Minor recommended for welfare monitoring. At risk of foster displacement if housing and health concerns are not addressed within 3 months. Trayston sat back, breath caught in his throat. 3 months. That was it. That was the window they had before the state could take Camry away from the only family she had left. And if that happened, he didn't want to imagine it. All this time, she hadn't just been surviving high school. She was fighting a silent war at home, holding up a crumbling life on 2 shoulders that hadn't even reached adulthood yet. Later that day, during free period, Trayston wandered to the outdoor courtyard, where Camry often ate alone under the willow trees. This time, she wasn't there. She was nowhere on campus, in fact. That was rare. Her absence left the air feeling heavier. At first, he figured she might be sick, but something in his gut said otherwise. Then, just before the final bell, he saw her, storming out of the administrative wing. Her face was red, her eyes glassy. She moved fast, her arms clutching her notebook tight against her chest like a shield. Trayston didn't think. He followed. She disappeared down the north stairwell. He caught up just as she slipped into an empty classroom near the faculty offices. He hesitated at the door, then knocked gently and cracked it open. Camry stood by the window, breathing hard, her back to him. "What do you want?" she said sharply, not turning around. Trayston closed the door softly behind him. "I saw you leave the admin wing. Is everything okay?" She gave a bitter laugh. "You mean aside from being a scholarship charity case and living on the edge of eviction?" He paused. "I didn't mean to pry. You don't need to pretend to care, Trayston," she cut him off, finally turning around. Her eyes burned now, wet but defiant. "You're one of them. Even if you don't act like it all the time, you'll always be one of them. This place isn't made for people like me. It's made for kids who fly to Aspen for the weekend because they're bored." He swallowed hard. "You're right. I used to be exactly like that." Camry's jaw tightened. "Used to be?" "Something changed," he said quietly. She scoffed, shaking her head. "Let me guess. You saw the sad girl with the empty lunchbox and thought it'd make a good story? A guilt project?" Trayston took a step forward. "No. I saw someone braver than anyone I've ever known." Camry blinked, caught off guard. He continued, voice lower now. "You come here every day, knowing they don't see you. Knowing they whisper when you walk by. And still you stay. You show up. You study harder than any of them. And you don't ask anyone for anything." There was silence. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint rattle of a tree branch outside. Camry looked down. "No, you don't know what it's like to worry that your little brother won't make it another year because you can't afford the meds. Or to watch your dad flinch in pain every time he tries to lift himself from bed. You don't know what it's like to carry all of that and still have to act like you're just another normal student here." "I don't," Trayston admitted. "But I want to understand. And I want to help." Camry looked at him then, really looked, as if she were trying to decide whether or not to believe him. After a long pause, she whispered, "You can't fix this with money." Trayston nodded slowly. "I know, but maybe I can help hold it up with you, even if it's just for a while." She didn't respond, but something in her expression softened, just a little. A tiny crack in the fortress she'd built. He didn't expect a thank you. He didn't even expect a smile. But when she walked past him to leave, she stopped at the door, turned slightly and said, "My brother's name is Dawson. He wants to be an astronaut." Then she left. And for Trayston, that one sentence felt like the beginning of something real. Trayston didn't waste a second. The moment Camry disappeared down the hallway, her quiet words still echoing in his mind, "My brother's name is Dawson. He wants to be an astronaut." He pulled out his phone and opened the encrypted chat thread he had with Nolan, his father's private assistant. Nolan knew everything. schedules, suppliers, offshore accounts, and more importantly, how to make things happen fast. I need a confidential medical consult for a 9-year-old boy, possible neurodegenerative condition. No names, no paperwork. Urgent. He sent it. Less than 2 minutes later, Nolan replied, "Understood. We'll have someone at St. Mark's Children's Hospital by tomorrow. Do you have records?" Trayston didn't, but he'd find a way. He had already made up his mind. He wasn't going to sit back and watch a child fade into the system simply because of money, not when he had more of it than he could ever spend. The next day, Trayston left school early, claiming a family obligation, and took a discreet car to Westbridge Trailer Park. The driver raised an eyebrow when given the address, but said nothing. When the sleek black sedan pulled into the cracked gravel path between rows of battered mobile homes, it felt like stepping into a parallel universe, one that existed just 30 minutes from his own mansion-lined neighborhood, but might as well have been another world. The trailer marked Lot 9 was small, its tin walls rusted, and the windows covered in mismatched curtains. A wind chime made from soda can tabs clinked softly in the breeze. As he approached, Trayston's nerves surged. He wasn't used to showing up anywhere unannounced. He wasn't used to being uncertain. He knocked once, then again. The door opened slowly. It was Reuben Levon. The man in the doorway sat in a motorized chair, his frame thin, shoulders hunched, one hand trembling slightly as it rested on the joystick. He had gray in his beard and the deep-set eyes of someone who had seen war, and too much of what came after it. "Yes," Reuben asked, voice gravelly. "Hi, sir. My name is Trayston Hale. I go to school with your daughter, Camry." Reuben's eyes narrowed cautiously. "You lost or something, son?" "No, sir," Trayston said with as much respect and calm as he could muster. I know this is sudden, and I apologize, but I know about your son, Dawson, and I'd like to help." Reuben stiffened instantly, suspicion sharpening his gaze. "We don't take handouts." "It's not a handout," Trayston said quickly. "It's a medical opportunity. A friend of mine, well, someone my family works with, can connect Dawson to specialists at St. Mark's. Quietly. No media, no exposure. Just help." Reuben looked at him long and hard. "You're Hale's boy, aren't you?" "Yes, sir." "I know your father. Corporate predator. Donates to a war memorial once a year and thinks that pays for everything he's taken." Trayston flinched, but didn't argue. "That's why I'm not asking him to help. This is from me, not from the Hale name." Reuben studied him for a long time. Then, slowly, the front door creaked open wider. "Dawson's inside." Trayston stepped in quietly. The air was warm, smelling faintly of cleaning fluid and old wood. The trailer was modest but tidy. Everything in its place. A tiny bookshelf stacked with used paperbacks, a blanket with rocket ships on the couch. And in the corner, under a soft light, a little boy lay on a padded recliner, drawing shapes in a sketch pad. His hair was thin, his arms a bit too small, but his eyes were enormous, curious, and bright with imagination. Trayston swallowed the lump in his throat. "Hi," he said softly. The boy looked up. "You're tall," he said bluntly. Trayston smiled. "And you've got the best space blanket I've ever seen." "It's not just space," Dawson said, pointing at the rockets. "No, that's the Artemis II design. The one that's going to go back to the moon." Trayston glanced at Reuben, who gave a faint shrug that said, "He's obsessed." "I heard you want to be an astronaut," Trayston said, walking closer. Dawson nodded. "No, but I'm not allowed to go to NASA unless I get better first. That's what Camry says." "She's right," Trayston said gently. "But what if I told you there are people who can help with that? Real doctors, the best." Dawson tilted his head. "Even better than Camry's Google search doctors?" Trayston laughed softly. "Even better than those." Behind him, Reuben hadn't moved, but something in the man's eyes had shifted. He wasn't smiling, not yet. But he wasn't stone anymore. Trayston took out a sealed envelope. Inside was the information for an intake appointment, a prepaid ride to the hospital, and a note written in his own hand. "You're not alone, and you're not forgotten. Tea." He placed it on the kitchen counter. "And no strings," he said. "You can walk away from it all. But if you say yes, they're expecting you tomorrow at noon." And then, without another word, he left. That night, he couldn't sleep again. Not because of nerves, but because for the first time in a long time, he felt something real flickering in his chest, something warm, like purpose. The next morning, Camry stopped him in the hallway. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes shimmered. "You went to my house," she said. Trayston nodded. "I did. You think you can just sweep in and fix everything?" "No," he said, "but I can try to make the load lighter, even just a little." Camry was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a soft, tired voice, she asked, "Why are you doing this, Trayston?" He looked at her with quiet honesty. "Because you looked in an empty lunchbox and still managed to pull out more strength than I've ever seen in my entire life." She didn't cry, but something in her cracked, and for the first time, she didn't push him away. She simply whispered, "Thank you," and walked away slowly, the pink lunchbox tucked under her arm. And for the first time since he met her, she didn't walk like she was alone. 3 days passed. The world around Rivercroft Academy continued spinning as if nothing had changed. Students talked about ski trips, designer sneakers, and college prep consultants. But for Trayston Hale, everything was different now. He couldn't focus during lectures, couldn't sit through economics without checking his phone every 10 minutes for updates. He even ignored 3 consecutive messages from his father, one about an investment dinner, one about taking over a tech startup, and one passive-aggressive reminder that Trayston needed to show face at the Hale Foundation's annual gala. He didn't care. His heart was elsewhere, 30 miles away, in a quiet hospital wing at St. Mark's Children's Hospital. He'd arranged for Dawson to have full diagnostic testing and a specialized neurology consult. The results weren't instant, but the initial findings gave hope. Very real, very possible hope. The treatment would be expensive, long-term, ongoing. But for the first time in years, Camry and her family had an answer. And more than that, they had a lifeline. Trayston sat on a bench under the old oak tree on campus, fingers steepled under his chin, trying to process it all. He had seen photos the doctor sent him, a small boy smiling under a tangle of wires and monitors, giving a thumbs up. Reuben had even written him a short letter, typed, formal, but undeniably heartfelt. It ended with the words, "You didn't owe us anything, but you showed up. That's more than most." But something still gnawed at Trayston's thoughts. Camry. She had kept her distance ever since. She no longer avoided him, but she didn't seek him out either. She offered polite nods in the hallway, the occasional quiet thank you when their eyes met, but she hadn't spoken to him in depth since that morning in the corridor. He could feel the wall between them. Less a wall of mistrust now, and more of pride. Camry wasn't used to needing anyone, especially not someone like him. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. Trayston was summoned to the headmaster's office. He entered the grand room, walls lined with old portraits and books nobody had touched in decades. Headmaster Brindle sat behind a mahogany desk, flanked by Dean Hollister and the school's guidance counselor, Mrs. Yara. They weren't angry. They were uncomfortable. "Trayston," Brindle began, clearing his throat. "We've received a report that one of our students, Miss Leven, is receiving undisclosed aid from a third-party benefactor." Trayston didn't flinch. "I'm aware," Brindle frowned. "Are you the benefactor?" "Yes." There was a long pause. Dean Hollister leaned forward. "You do understand this puts the school in a difficult position. Camry Leven was admitted under a special clause designed to maintain her independence and merit-based status. If it becomes known that she's receiving outside help, especially from another student's family, it could affect her placement." Trayston felt his jaw tighten. "So you'd rather she suffer than get help?" Brindle raised a hand. "That's not what we're saying, but discretion is important, especially in a school like this." Trayston stood up, his voice calm but edged with steel. Then here's my suggestion. Instead of worrying about your public image, try focusing on the student who's fighting to survive while everyone else here is deciding what yacht to buy. Before they could respond, he walked out. Later that night, he found Camry sitting on the steps outside the library. Her pink lunchbox rested beside her. She didn't look surprised to see him. "They called me into the office," she said quietly. "I know," he replied, lowering himself to sit beside her. "They told me your help could jeopardize my scholarship." He looked down. "I'm sorry." She turned to him then. "Now, why didn't you tell me?" Because I didn't want you to feel like you owed me anything, or worse, that you were part of some charity project. Her eyes softened. But I'm not angry, I'm just scared. I don't know how to live in a world where people help without expecting something in return. You can, he said, and you're not alone anymore. For the first time, she gave him a real smile. It was small, hesitant, but radiant in its honesty. Then, without a word, she opened the lunchbox beside her and pulled out the cloth napkin again. She unfolded it slowly and handed it to him. He held it in his hands. For the first time, he could read the stitching clearly. Never forget who you are, even if you have nothing. He looked up. Camry's eyes shimmered in the lamplight. She made it when I was little, she said. My mom. She used to say, the world will try to take everything from you, but it can't take your name or your kindness. Trayston swallowed the lump in his throat. She sounds like someone I wish I'd met. Camry nodded. You would have liked her. She believed in fixing broken things, even if the world said they weren't worth fixing. They sat together in silence. The moon rose higher, casting soft light across the campus. For the first time in months, Camry didn't look like she was carrying the world on her shoulders. And for the first time in Trayston's life, he felt lighter, not because of what he'd given, but because of what he'd finally found. Something real, someone real. And in her presence, the world didn't feel as hollow. Spring slowly crept into Rivercroft Academy, bringing with it soft rains, the scent of wet earth, and blossoming dogwood trees. But for the first time in Trayston Hale's memory, it wasn't just the weather that was changing. It was the people. News spread quietly, never directly spoken, but passed in whispers between students and staff. The girl with the pink lunchbox wasn't invisible anymore. There were murmurs of her little brother's recovery, of hospital visits and medical miracles. No one knew the details, but Trayston noticed that Camry walked differently now, shoulders a little straighter, eyes no longer glued to the floor. But she hadn't changed who she was. Camry still sat in the back of the class, still wore her faded cardigan and kept her hair in a simple braid. What had changed was how people saw her, respectfully, cautiously, like someone who had proven she belonged, not because she demanded it, but because she endured more than they ever had to. And Trayston? He had changed too. He no longer drifted through Rivercroft like a bored prince. He was now purposeful, present. He skipped his usual driver and began biking to school. He dropped out of 3 elite extracurriculars and instead founded a student-led initiative called Project Compass, aimed at creating real support systems for underprivileged students like Camry. He gave speeches, organized funding, connected with local charities. But most importantly, he listened to stories like Camry's, stories that had been buried under the weight of polished uniforms and billion-dollar legacies. One afternoon, while walking through the art wing, Trayston noticed something on the bulletin board outside room 317, a flyer for the annual Legacy Essay Competition. It was the biggest written award Rivercroft offered, a chance for students to publish their stories and win a $10,000 scholarship to the college of their choice. The prompt was simple. What do you want to leave behind? Trayston tore off a tab at the bottom and carried it with him all day. That night, he texted Camry. You should enter. It's your story they need to hear. She didn't respond right away. Hours passed. Then, just before midnight, her reply came, It's not their kind of story. He didn't push her. Instead, he printed out the flyer and left it in her locker the next morning, with a note written in small block letters. The world doesn't change by hearing the same voices. It changes when someone finally dares to speak up. A week later, she submitted her essay. She titled it, The Lunchbox. Trayston only found out because Mrs. Yara, the guidance counselor, pulled him aside with teary eyes. She wrote about the photo and the napkin, she whispered. But she also wrote about you, about kindness without cost, about remembering that dignity doesn't come from wealth, but from love. The essay swept through the judging panel like wildfire. One of the board members called it the most emotionally honest submission the school has received in a decade. When the day of the awards ceremony arrived, the entire school gathered in the auditorium, a place once dominated by legacy names and over-rehearsed speeches, now echoed with a different energy. Trayston sat in the front row, heart pounding, as Camry approached the stage in a simple navy dress that still had a thrift store tag stitched inside. She looked down at the crowd, not nervous, but calm, centered, like she'd been standing on that stage in her mind for years. "I was never supposed to be here," she began. "This school, this room, this microphone, they weren't meant for people like me. I come from a trailer park. My dad is a disabled vet. My brother is sick. I've eaten dinner by candlelight not for romance, but because the power was out. And yet," she paused, opening the pink lunchbox in her hands. "This lunchbox has never been about food. It's about memory. It's about carrying the people who kept me alive through their love, my mother, my brother, my father, and someone new who saw me when I didn't even want to be seen." She looked at Tristan then, just for a second. "This is what I want to leave behind. Proof that quiet stories matter. That survival is strength. That kindness isn't weakness. It's courage." The room was silent when she finished. Then, like a rising wave, the applause erupted. Not polite, not forced, real. When she stepped down, Tristan stood. They met halfway up the aisle, no words between them, just that look, that knowing. After the ceremony, Camry approached him outside beneath the blooming dogwood tree. "They're offering to publish the essay," she said. "You should let them." She hesitated. "It'll mean people know everything. That's what makes it powerful," he said, "that you didn't hide." Camry reached into her bag and pulled something out. It was the napkin, the same one she'd held so many times before. But now there was something new. Beneath her mother's old stitching, Camry had sewn a second line in thread the color of soft gold. "You're not alone anymore." She handed it to him. And Tristan, billionaire heir, reformer friend, held it like it was worth more than every company his family owned. Graduation day arrived bathed in golden sunlight. The Rivercroft Academy campus, usually a place of silent competition and wealth-fueled detachment, now hummed with anticipation and pride. Blue and silver banners waved lazily in the breeze, and families began gathering on the marble steps of the ceremony hall. Photographers clicked away as students in custom-tailored robes adjusted their caps and posed beside imported floral arrangements. Among them stood Tristan Hale, dressed in the same deep blue gown as everyone else, but looking entirely unlike the boy he had been at the start of the year. The shallow arrogance that once coded his every word had dissolved. His shoulders, once slumped under the weight of empty expectations, were now square with direction. He wore no gold medallions or special cords, despite qualifying for them all. He had declined every award except one, the Community Impact Citation, which he had quietly accepted on behalf of Project Compass, the program he started in Camry's name. He stood off to the side, eyes scanning the crowd for just one person, and then he saw her. Camry. She walked through the arch of stone ivy toward the lawn, her dark hair tucked neatly beneath her cap, and the same navy dress she had worn at the essay ceremony, peeking from beneath her gown. Her pink lunchbox was clutched in one hand, not as a statement, but as a piece of who she was. A memory, a message, a legacy. It had been with her through every step of the journey, and now it had carried her all the way here. As the names were called, Camry sat quietly between students whose parents owned media empires and pharmaceutical conglomerates. But when her name was announced, Camry Elise Levon, recipient of the Legacy Essay Prize, with full academic scholarship to Stanford University. The audience erupted in a roar of genuine applause. Even the students who had once ignored her were now on their feet. From the edge of the stage, Tristan clapped harder than anyone. The ceremony ended with an ovation, confetti, and the symbolic tossing of caps. But while others hurried off for photographs and champagne, Tristan made his way around the side of the hall toward a quieter spot behind the oak tree. Their spot. She was already there, waiting. "You remembered," she said, smiling as he approached. "I always will," he answered. They stood together for a long moment, the silence between them soft and warm. Then, slowly, Camry opened the lunchbox. It looked the same on the outside, weathered and humble, but inside, everything had changed. Tristan peered in. There was no napkin this time, no photograph, no cloth lining. Instead, it held a single envelope. White, handwritten. Camry reached in and handed it to him. He opened it carefully and began to read. "To Tristan, I never thought someone like you would see someone like me. I didn't ask for help because I didn't believe in it. I didn't trust kindness because I didn't believe it could come without a price. But you showed me otherwise. You never tried to fix me, you stood beside me. And in doing so, you gave me something I'd lost a long time ago: belief. In the future, I may be known for my essays or my studies or what I build, but everything I become will have started with the day you sat down beside a girl with an empty lunchbox and treated her like she mattered. Thank you, Camry. Trayston folded the letter with trembling hands. His throat was too tight for words, so he did the only thing that felt true. He reached for her hand and held it, their fingers laced together effortlessly, as though the universe had been waiting for that connection all along. Do you think, Camry said quietly, we'll still be us, even when we're far apart? Even when I'm at Stanford and you're wherever you're going? He nodded. We'll always be us. Because this, he looked at her, not the lunchbox, this was never about proximity. It was about truth, and I'll carry that with me wherever I go. She leaned in then, pressing her forehead gently against his. The world around them buzzed with celebration, but here, in this pocket of peace, there was only stillness and promise. Later that summer, a quiet announcement went viral online. Rivercroft graduate Camry Levin partners with Trayston Hale to launch National Initiative for Education Equity, the Lunchbox Project. The logo? A small pink lunchbox with stitched thread running through its center like a heart. And the tagline, printed on every folder, every notebook, every community toolkit they would one day distribute across the country? Never forget who you are, even if you have nothing. Because thanks to Camry, Trayston, and a story that began with silence and sacrifice, thousands of other children wouldn't feel invisible again. And somewhere in that, the girl with the empty lunchbox finally filled the world with more than enough. In my view, the ending of the story is not just satisfying, it's deeply restorative. It completes a quiet revolution that began with a silent girl and a boy born into noise. What started as an observation, one student noticing another, evolved into an act of compassion, then into purpose, and ultimately into transformation on both sides. The final chapter isn't about a romantic culmination or a grand cinematic gesture. It's about legacy, the kind that doesn't fade with wealth or status. Camry, once invisible, becomes a voice for thousands. Trayston, once drifting in a sea of expectations, anchors himself in something real: service, empathy, and love without condition. The pink lunchbox, once a symbol of emptiness, becomes a symbol of fullness, of memory, strength, identity, and hope. And that's what makes this ending so powerful. It reminds us that even the smallest acts of kindness, sitting beside someone, listening, believing in their worth, can change the trajectory of lives. This isn't just a happy ending. It's the right one, because it doesn't erase the pain that came before. It honors it and builds something beautiful on top of it.